Earlier, we reported that legislation was introduced today to create a special council on justice reform in Georgia. In our leadership segment tonight, Monday asked House Speaker David Ralston how he could assure that the work of this council will really lead to reform.
I think there's two keys to the work of the council. Number one is the commitment that the governor and the lieutenant governor and I and the Chief Justice have behind this whole need to reform the way we sentence people in our criminal justice system. So I think the level of commitment is critical. The second thing is the council gives us an opportunity to look at alternatives to incarceration, whether it's drug courts or mental health courts or community-based treatment and that sort of thing. So I think the commitment is there. I'm confident that we're going to have a good year of working on this issue, and that this council is going to bring back something that will be the basis for legislative action next year, because I think, as we said today, we can't wait any longer on this, because this is such a huge part of our state budget that we have to move on this.
You've certainly served in the General Assembly long enough to remember when the kind of tough on crime came in, the 3 strikes and you're out.
Right.
What has changed here in Georgia, as you see it, that kind of allows this to come in?
Well, I think we now know that some of the reforms that we did, particularly back in the 90s, probably swept with too large a broom, maybe, that came with a great price tag. The 90s were a completely different time financially in state government. We now know that the cost of those programs and the cost of those sentencing changes is exorbitant, and I think that it probably was a higher number than probably we estimated at the time, and now we're having to really focus on what our priorities are in state government. And really ask ourselves who needs to be incarcerated and who can better be rehabilitated out in the community.
There was a group here this morning, switching gears a little bit, they're calling themselves the Georgia Alliance for Ethics Reform, a conglomeration of groups, and they were here calling for some legislation that would, one, cap the amount that legislators can receive as far as gifts, and also look at some stronger reporting standards. You obviously have received some criticism for your trip that you took to Europe with your family, and I'm wondering, do you feel that there is a need to strengthen some of these ethics laws, and what is kind of the benefit of having legislators be able to interact with the business community in the way that they can currently?
Well, I think there is a benefit. There is a benefit in having the ability to look at new ways of doing things that can enhance economic development, for example. We passed a very strong ethics reform package last session. It only went into effect about a month ago. I believe that we ought to give that new law time to work, and let's see how far. Let's kind of take a look at it and watch it operate before we start talking about changing it again. But here's the real key. I believe that the people of Georgia, the voters of Georgia, have the good judgment and the intelligence to make decisions about caps. I don't think government ought to be doing that, frankly. And because of what we did last year and what the changes that we've made to our ethics laws in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years here in Georgia, every Georgian is a mouse click away from knowing every nickel that's spent on me or any other member of the General Assembly. So I think with that kind of information out there, I think Georgians are equipped to make good judgments, and so I'm going to trust their judgment.
So are you suggesting that by checking on those things, they would make their decisions at election time?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Another issue that, of course, is getting people talking, at least outside of the Gold Dome, is Sunday sales. Everyone wondering what's going to happen with that. It looked like it was moving at a pretty good clip, now maybe slowing down a little bit. What do you want to see happen this year as far as Sunday sales of alcohol?
Well, that's really not about Sunday sales. It's more about local control and about whether the people at the local level ought to have a right to weigh in on issues such as the package sales of alcoholic beverages on Sundays in their community. If that measure were to be passed here this year, it wouldn't make available 1 drop of alcohol anywhere in Georgia until there had been a local referendum in a community that chose to vote on it. Communities don't have to vote on it. It's been around a while. It's been around, as you know, for 3, 4, 5 years. I'm not taking a position on the measure. It just may be one of those measures that we just need to let the members vote on so we can move on to the next issue.
And speaking of which, it seemed like we got off to kind of a slow clip as far as the legislative session, obviously with the snow as the beginning of the actual session, but also a little bit less legislation making its way through than usual. What are some of the priorities that actually have to happen? Obviously the budget, but beyond that, what has to happen this year?
I think the slow clip's good. I've been an advocate since I've been Speaker that we need to do, instead of trying to pass hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new laws every year, that what we ought to do is focus on a few things and do them right. I don't sense a great outcry from Georgians for us to pass all these new laws. So I kind of like the slower clip, actually. When we're going at a slower clip, we're focusing more on what it is that we have to do. Here's what we have to do this session. We have to balance the budget. That's the one thing that the law mandates that we do, pass a balanced budget. We don't have the luxury of doing what they do in Washington by printing money and spending us into debt. So we're going to pass a balanced budget like we did last year. That's a challenge in this kind of climate. In the current economic climate that we're in. It's a real challenge, but we're going to get it done. The other thing we have to do this session is preserve and keep intact the Hope Scholarship Program. And we're going to do that. We're going to make whatever necessary adjustments we have to make so that future generations of Georgia's best and brightest young people will have the promise of hope out there to reward outstanding academic work. So there are a few other things that we're going to look at, but we're really looking at things now from this perspective. What makes Georgia more competitive economically? I don't think there is anything we can do more important than to make Georgia as competitive as we possibly can in terms of our tax policy, in terms of economic development, so that we can bring jobs here and put Georgians back to work. And so we're looking through that filter at everything that we do this session.
All right. Well, Mr. Speaker, always appreciate your insights here on Primetime Lawmakers.
Always great to visit with you. Thank you.